Ever walked away from conflict thinking, why does this keep happening? Here's the truth. Conflict is normal, but peace starts when we're willing to look within. Let's talk about what God says your role really is and how it leads to healing. Welcome to the Truth Be Told Project, where we help you live according to your intended design, God's design, and not by default. In today's episode, we're talking about conflict. Yep, you heard that right. That uncomfortable, messy, totally normal part of life, whether it's a heated moment with your spouse or unspoken tension with a friend or coworker. Conflict is something we all face. But what if we saw it not as a sign of failure, but as an opportunity for growth? Join us as we explore common triggers, examine our own patterns, and discover how God's grace can guide us through every hard conversation with clarity, compassion, and peace. That's what comes up today on the Truth Be Told Project podcast. You ever had a moment where someone said something and it just hit you wrong? Maybe it was a friend, maybe it was your spouse, maybe it was a coworker, and suddenly the air gets tense. You replay that moment in your head a dozen times thinking, was I overreacting? Were they being rude? Were they getting out of pocket? What just happened? If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. Conflict happens to everyone. It shows up in our families, our friendships, our churches, and even inside our own thoughts. And sometimes, especially in Christian spaces, we feel like we shouldn't be having conflict at all. I know that's what I used to think. Like, if we just prayed more or had more faith, we live in some constant state of peace and harmony. But let's be honest, we're human. We've got emotions and wounds that collide with other people's emotions, experiences, and wounds. And that's where the friction begins. So today we're going to talk about conflict, not in a way that shames you or tells you just be more loving, but in a way that helps you understand it better. We'll explore what triggers conflict, why it's completely normal, and how recognizing your own patterns is actually one of the most powerful feelings and freeing things you can do. And we're going to do it through the lens of grace, the kind of grace Jesus extends to us, and the kind we're learning to extend to ourselves and others. So here's what we'll unpack together: why conflict isn't necessarily a sign that something's broken, the common reasons conflict start, and even when nobody means to hurt anyone, how to gently recognize your own role and tension without spiraling into guilt or shame. Because let's be real, conflict doesn't make you a bad Christian, a bad partner, or a bad friend. It makes you a person. The kind of person Jesus still walks with, teaches, and loves deeply, even in the mess. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's explore this together without judgment, without pressure. Just a real, honest conversation about what it means to live and love in a world where conflict is part of the story. Your role in tension. This might be the hardest part to talk about, but also the one that changes everything. What if we played a role in the very tension we're feeling? And now hear me out. This isn't about blaming ourselves or taking on more than we should. It's about owning our piece of the puzzle so we can actually experience more peace and freedom in our relationship. And here's the truth. Most conflict is co-created. Not always equally, not always intentionally, but still co-created. And when we stop pointing fingers only outward and start getting curious about what's going on the inside, that's when growth begins. The Bible talks about this kind of reflection in Matthew chapter 7. Jesus says to first take the plank out of our own eye before addressing the speck in someone else's. That's not to say the other person has no fault, but it reminds us to start with self-awareness. So let's ask a bold question. What's my part in this conflict? Sometimes it's a pattern we didn't know we had. Maybe we interrupt without realizing it. Maybe we get defensive when we feel misunderstood. Maybe we shut down when someone raises their voice, not because we're trying to be difficult, but because it feels safer. These responses often come from past experiences, but just because something is understandable doesn't mean it's unchangeable. We can bring these patterns to the light with compassion, not condemnation, and begin to rewrite them. Other times, our role in conflict shows up in how we communicate. Do we leave things bottled up until we explode? I've done that plenty of times. Do we use sarcasm as a shield? I've done that also plenty of times. Do we assume people should just know how we feel? I've assumed that many a times. These habits might be subtle, but they can create tension over time. And here's where the Christian perspective brings hope. We're not stuck. With the help of the Holy Spirit, we can become more gentle, more honest, more aware. Not perfect, but transform. Self-awareness is one of the most loving gifts we can offer in any relationship, because when we own our stuff, we create space for real connection. We stop reacting from ego or fear and start engaging with humility and care. And I know this isn't easy. It takes courage to say, yeah, I think I escalated that, or I shut down. I want to do better. But that kind of honesty is powerful. It builds trust. It says, I care enough about this connection to grow through the hard parts. It's also okay to realize that you don't have the full picture, that your perception, while valid, may not be the whole truth. That's why curiosity is your superpower. Instead of assuming, ask. Instead of defending, explore. Help me understand what you were feeling when you said that. That one sentence can shift the entire dynamic. You're not weak for taking responsibility. You're strong for stepping out of the blame cycle, the blame game, part of human nature. We see that in the book of Genesis. Adam blamed Eve, Eve blamed the devil, Adam blamed God for giving him Eve, and so on and so forth. The blame cycle is a part of human nature. But when you take responsibility, you're strong, taking a strong approach. You're living the gospel, extending grace, seeking truth, and showing up with humility. And let's be real, we all have blind spots. That's part of being human. The more we ask God to search our hearts, the more He gently reveals things that don't need to stay hidden, not to shame us, but to set us free. Psalm 139 says, search me, God, and know my heart. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. That's not a prayer of guilt. That's a prayer of growth. And if you're thinking, okay, but what if the other person never owns their part? It's hard. I get it. Believe me, I get it. But remember, your healing isn't dependent on their behavior. Your peace doesn't have to wait for their apology. You can take responsibility for your part and still have boundaries. You can choose clarity over control. Taking ownership isn't about taking all the blame. It's about reclaiming your power to grow, to change, to lead with love, even when it's hard. And don't underestimate what that does in someone else's heart. Sometimes your self-awareness becomes an invitation for them to look inward too. Not always, but sometimes. The most disarming thing you can do is say, I'm sorry for my part. Even if theirs was bigger, that kind of humility can soften the entire room. So let's be people who don't just look outward, but inward. people who ask hard questions, tell the truth gently, and trust God to do the deep heart work in us and through us. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be willing.